when you think about negotiated coalition agreements where people argue over half sentences for weeks, and in the end, what comes out is some damp squib that nobody needs.
We are afraid to show ourselves as weak or vulnerable, both as people and as brands. On the other hand, brands that openly admit their weaknesses and don't hide them, but instead communicate them publicly, are perceived as stronger.
Thesaurus wasn't in the Old Testament.
No, also not with the Greeks, but Abraham and so on. Yes, thank you, thank you. I'm not perfect either. But still, and I still want to talk about it.
Practiced imperfectionism.
BrandTrust Life.
Hello and welcome back, dear viewers, to a new episode of BrandTrust Life. Today, with a topic that really excites me personally and that I'm very much looking forward to, namely the topic of imperfectionism and how important and beneficial imperfectionism can be for society, the state, the church, and brand building. And as always, my imperfect colleague Shalina Schroeder is here with me.
He's back again.
Who challenges me here, inspires me, and agitates me. And that's the topic we want to focus on today. We are in Germany, and you always notice this when you travel abroad as a German. That we are definitely the ones who want everything to be perfect. That has a lot to do with religion. It has to do with Calvinism and those kinds of things. And our problem is, of course, that's how we became rich and famous. We have the best plant engineers, the best mechanical engineers in the world, the best cars and so on. I think that has brought us a great deal. And I think at the latest, about 20 years ago, when digitalization began, where the product was essentially perfected from update to update together with the users, that was when the first crack appeared. And I believe we are now in a situation and a time where that is actually more of a hindrance. On a small scale, this is what we're getting to now, as well as on a larger scale, and even in society as a whole, if you think about negotiated coalition agreements, where people argue over half sentences for weeks, and in the end what comes out is some damp squib that nobody needs. And that's what we want to talk about a bit now, the beauty of imperfection, the advantages of imperfection, and we want to create a counter image to German perfectionism, which might also be interesting to take a closer look at. That's what it's about.
Speaking of counter images, is imperfectionism really the opposite of perfectionism? Because I would say no.
Imperfect isn't bad either, right?
Exactly for that reason.
And perfect isn't necessarily good.
Semantically, it's always tempting to think that with the prefix, it becomes the opposite. I've thought about this for much longer. I think I would describe the opposite of perfectionism as carelessness. And I would describe imperfect as good enough.
When was the last time you did something imperfect? Now, consciously imperfect, the way we're trying to define it right now.
So I would say whenever I feel like I'm under time pressure and have to send something out, I say, is it good enough? Is it finished enough? Zach out, otherwise I wouldn't get it done.
Do you do that consciously? Yeah. Say 80% is enough. Yeah. That's another kind of benchmark, right? Something imperfect.
Otherwise, we're back to the same topic.
No, but I think that really brings up a very, very important aspect, namely speed. I think we've all learned that. As a company, we need to become faster. When something comes up, you have to act on it right away and do it fast. And well, as a service-oriented, small business like ours, I think we manage that pretty well and actually enjoy it a lot too. As a corporation, it's almost impossible. That's exactly what makes the situation so damaging right now and so threatening for the German economy.
I've noticed this with several agencies that in the best possible sense are now doing assembly line work for companies. These companies no longer want to buy in a lot of know-how, but instead delegate a lot or even more areas of responsibility to all the agencies, who then deliver in extremely small iterations or timeframes. And as a result, there are often spelling mistakes and so on. And I'm always surprised by how little the client CEOs care about it. They just say, well, at least it's fast. So this imperfection, which I still struggle with, is completely accepted there because they say, well, at least I got it within 2 hours.
But let's talk about that, right? That's exactly the line you drew earlier between carelessness and imperfectionism, right? When it comes to spelling, I also get a bit twitchy about whether I should consider that imperfectionism or just carelessness. But let's approach the topic. Now, if you look at other cultures, and you just mentioned it, there's of course a connection to, well, embracing happy accidents. The topic of imperfectionism is handled differently there. For example, in Japan, there's a, let's call it a Japanese interior design philosophy called wabi-sabi. That means honoring the imperfect. It also draws heavily on nature. And just to give a simple example, they might cut off a tree root, turn it upside down, put it in the living room as a table, and then do nothing else to it. They don't refine it or process it. They just leave it as it is. Or a milking stool that's 300 years old and already bears the marks of 300 years of work and use. That too is elevated, so to speak, to the status of an altar as a living room table. And there's also a Japanese technique that's become somewhat well known when ceramics develop cracks, either from firing, from use, or even from damage. They're not simply thrown away or repaired. Instead, this technique called kintsugi fills those cracks with gold. By using gold, they want to honor the object, to make it valuable once again. But they actually want to emphasize it even more. And in fact, if you Google it and look at the images, you'll see that it creates a very unique style, design, and visual language brought about by these accidental cracks and damages, things you wouldn't intentionally create. And I think that's beautiful. This emphasis on imperfection is, in my opinion, a wonderful way to approach it.
Yes, at the same time, it's also an emphasis on individuality. That makes it even more unique.
It becomes one of a kind.
I always wonder anyway, does perfection even exist? Or is it just an idea, a concept that we're constantly chasing after?
And I once met a watchmaker, François-Paul Schuhen. He's already older now, but he's become extremely sought after among collectors. And he, well, in Geneva, he first repaired watches and then started his own business there as a manufacturer. And back when I met him, he was making about 600 watches a year, so really micro scale. And I was there with a watch dealer, and he took the opportunity while we were with him to complain a bit, because he had already had several customers who had returned their watches, wristwatches in the 5 or 6 figure price range, saying, well, it doesn't work, it stopped, or it shows the wrong time, so it's imperfect. So he showed us 3 examples and put the watches on the table. One of them was simply running 5 minutes fast per day. Another had just stopped completely, and there was something wrong with the third one as well. And then François Paul said, with an elegance that only a Frenchman can have, it's the charm of the watch.
Yeah, awesome.
C'est le charme de la montre. So he actually didn't attribute that functional value to his own creations anymore. The value that says it has to be perfectly accurate to the second, which is something a lot of people really work hard to achieve with mechanical constructions. He just accepted it as it is. It just stopped. In other words, a watch from him is not exclusively a functional timepiece, but rather it's actually a piece of jewelry or a status symbol, or however you want to put it. And this charming watch, 80 or 100%? Gut feeling or head?
Belly.
Better done or perfect?
Better done.
Buy new or repair?
Repair?
First hand or second hand?
Whoa. Now it really depends on when...
Put it on, ready.
What, first hand, to be honest.
Depends. Then right? Wrinkle or Botox?
Wrinkle.
Easy for you to say now.
Yeah, for now.
Let's stick with wrinkles. Creased pants or crumpled look?
I have to be honest, crumpled look.
Ironed or non-iron?
Oh. Non-iron. No, ironed. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's better, right?
Yeah.
Expensive shoes or trendy shoes?
Expensive shoes.
Come on, quick. Emphasize or conceal?
Emphasize.
Emphasize. Good emphasize.
I'll give an example of a slightly more low-key brand that's already done this, namely Ace and Tate. They did a campaign a few years ago, something along the lines of embrace the flaws, and then publicly showed it's an eyewear brand, also from the Netherlands, I think, that always had some small imperfections. So either the lenses weren't ground exactly the same, or there was a small break on the temple, or something like that. And then they really highlighted these flaws and said, that's uniqueness. So similar to this philosophy, only they didn't paint it gold, but rather drew attention to it and said, it doesn't affect the functionality. Good enough. You could argue about that with watches, although nowadays they're just status symbols anyway, so it fits again. And that's why you can use them as a sign of your individuality. That's why you only have this one piece, because the perfect piece would be reproduced and therefore wouldn't be unique anymore. And another brand that also plays with this idea, but in a completely different way, is of course IKEA, which always deals with things like the shelf is crooked, a part is missing, or something like that. So you're already waiting for it. How often when someone is assembling an IKEA shelf, I think everyone has had that moment where at some point they say, oh, the instructions are wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
They forgot a screw. Or there are too many screws anyway. They included extra ones just in case. You always think you're clever. And in the end, it turns out you weren't. But this positive or negative bias toward imperfection is already completely present. And IKEA actually plays with that. They've even run campaigns featuring crooked billy shelves and have flirted with that idea. And it has a wonderfully psychological effect because it creates a sense of equality. I remove the distance because I show that we're not infallible either. And no person is infallible. Everyone knows this about themselves. And some of us do our absolute best to pretend as if we're perfect. It's incredibly exhausting. And when someone else admits, oh, I'm not like that at all, it's like, such a relieved exhale. You suddenly feel a sympathetic connection. You feel on equal footing. And that creates, well, more closeness. And what this fosters, of course, is authenticity, right? We admit that not everything is perfect. The world isn't like that. We're all operating under uncertainty, all doing our best. It's good enough. And as a result, really wonderful, deeper identification effects happen from customers, from the community, toward the brand itself.
It makes brands approachable and human. I think that's the crucial point.
We're afraid to show ourselves as weak or vulnerable, both as people and as brands. On the other hand, brands that openly admit their weaknesses and don't try to hide them, but instead communicate them publicly, are actually perceived as stronger. It's no different for us. If you have, a politician who stands in front of the camera and says, yes, I misjudged that, we made a mistake, that person earns respect, that person gains esteem. And it's the same principle.
So why do so few people do it? Instead, there's all this hemming and hawing, dodging and evading. I often think to myself, I say, guys, that's actually a sign of confidence. Being able to admit weaknesses, well, just like you said. Why, if you get caught, don't you just admit it? I think that's exactly what you're saying. Whether it's products, objects, service quality, or even management skills, personality issues, just say it. Especially at the DAX CEO level, there was that BMW CEO who once had a fainting spell on stage. Although, to be fair, he wasn't BMW CEO for very long, I should add. One of the shortest tenures, I think. He basically had to be carried off the stage, so to speak, during the press conference. But I don't know how you feel about it. For me, it immediately creates a sense of closeness. I think, he's just a person. Authenticity, yes. Just like you and me, right? Because it could happen to us too. And in that sense, I think that's exactly what you're saying. It's a wonderful potential for brands or brand representatives, not just at the C-level, but also for a salesperson, for example, sitting in front of a customer. And it's perfectly fine for them to admit a weakness now and then, or simply say, if the product still has an issue, because it's not fully developed yet. I mean, I don't have to just, I've experienced it so often where they try to sugarcoat their nonsense somehow. And I mean, we all have a sense for that. From the moment you notice, okay, now, and in the end, that harms the brand and also the person much more, much more. Or like, the guy in the clothing store and the saleswoman says, wow, Mrs. Schroeder, you look fantastic. And you think, yeah, that's what a sales pitch can look like, sure. Or as always, yeah, I'm already used to it. Thank you very much. In any case, I think that many brands are striving for approachability. They want to create a connection. Think of banks, service providers.
Absolutely.
Yes. And then always this appearance, this polished, slick perfection, which only increases the distance and creates dominance. And as a customer, it makes me feel small and awkward. Think about it. We just did an insurance study, right? Exactly the same thing. Instead of saying, hey guys, we don't really know either. Let's talk about how we can approach this.
So the distance that's created by perfectionism, or by making mistakes, of course, also creates authority. I can preach down from the hill, give orders. I can take things better. I'm elevating myself above the others. In the Old Testament, and the heroes, Abraham and Odysseus, they all had flaws.
Odysseus wasn't in the Old Testament.
They were, also among the Greeks. Just briefly. Yes, thank you. I'm not perfect either. But still, I still want to talk about Odysseus. So he lived in perfectionism. He was and Odysseus with Abraham, he was way too proud.
How was it when Moses built the ark?
Do you know that one? Oh my God, that's funny. So, and Abraham, lied to his wife and so on. So what I'm trying to say is, let's stick to the Old Testament for now. The heroes in the Old Testament all had some kind of weakness. You could relate to them much more. Pay attention to that the next time you read it. You could identify with them, which made this moral everyday relevance higher. And then in the New Testament, all of a sudden you had Jesus Christ and so on. And also through the 10 Commandments, infallibility was introduced. And with that, the church, that's how it was partly explained to me. When they really started to evangelize, they needed them. There's an explanatory approach. Whether it's true or not is another matter. But in my opinion, it makes sense. They needed more distance to preach down from the hill, so to speak, to have the superiority and thus be able to dictate much more. Like, you have to do this now, dear, indulgence letters and so on and so forth. And in doing so, it established authority through distance and has managed to maintain that very successfully for 2,000 years now. You're going to see yourself a lot in a work context now.
Great.
I ask you to be honest, my dear. Well then, let's see. The perfect PowerPoint slide or a hand-drawn flip chart doodle?
Hand-drawn flip chart doodle.
Brand strategy on a napkin at dinner or via WhatsApp?
Napkin at dinner.
Period or no period in WhatsApp messages?
Period. Yeah, I'm particular about that. And punctuation marks. I think that's important.
Important, it really is important. Dictation or voice message? Dictation function or voice message?
Only dictation function. Voice messages are terrible.
Jean shirt with patina or tailored suit with a message?
Both.
Paper chaos on your desk or digital to-do list?
I'm totally digital there.
Stats or Post-it?
Now you have to explain what status are.
Oh, come on, man, really?
Self-adhesive. Yeah. Statistics. Of course, you can do wilder things with them.
Makes sense or has sense?
Power. Sin.
Trial and error or think twice, act just once?
Both. Depends.
In public, deliberate language mistake for more attention or grammatically correct?
Deliberate language mistake. Always make mistakes. It makes you likable.
Yeah. Actually, Klaus, I wanted to come back to your question. Why do we always try to appear so perfect? And then you just kept talking, and I'd like to answer it before you even take a breath. I think there are two reasons for that. One is, of course, here comes an evolutionary biology explanation. So, in the past, admitting weakness could mean being cast out of the group because the weaker ones cost you energy and food and so on. You risk death if you take them along. So I think that's still somewhere inside us, that we're afraid of being cast out and that our connection to the group, the herd, to society is inherently one of the most important things for us, right alongside authenticity. And I think in today's context, it's this fear of not being respected combined with the fact that in our achievement-oriented society, we've tied our self-worth so closely to performance that we often don't even admit to ourselves, I did something wrong or I made a mistake. So I think that often we can't even say it out loud in our own heads, and we'd rather fool ourselves so that the self-image we have, which is so closely tied to our performance, doesn't get any cracks, because that would actually hurt us physically. And people who have already managed to detach their self-image from this performance or are able to do so, those are the ones who are as deeply relaxed as your designer there.
Yeah, but you also have to break away a bit from your conditioning. I mean, it's instilled in us as well. Absolutely. Yeah, especially in the context you mentioned at school. Everything is evaluated according to standards that are sometimes really questionable. At home, making your bed, and in the military, for those from my generation who had to make their beds there, it had to be as if drawn with a ruler. This Prussian Protestant element, which unfortunately also spread to Bavaria and shaped the way we were raised. Why are Swiss watches so precise? Why is Switzerland known for that? That's Calvinism. At work, because perfectionism used to mean a business advantage. Manufacturing accurate down to the micrometer and so on. And I mean, to go back to Japan again, the Japanese are certainly no slouches in that area either. So we're really talking about topics of the highest precision. That's still the case today, whether it's watches, laser technology, or surgical and medical fields. These are camera optical systems. Here the Japanese are still leading because this is also ingrained in their culture. On the other hand, they also have wabi-sabi and kintsugi. And they celebrate and honor the imperfect. And I think in that respect, Buddhist or Shinto philosophy over there is a bit more balanced than ours. And again, we must not forget that this German precision Swiss made has brought us considerable prosperity. But I think that, especially nowadays, we are losing out on a lot because of it, particularly when it comes to speed. If I accept 80%, I can multiply my speed, because it's those last 20%, those very last 5%, that make projects drag on forever. Just look at Deutsche Bahn, for example. Then if I consciously, that's the difference from negligence. If I consciously say, that's enough now, up to that point, we try to do it as well as possible. And then we leave it a bit to the play of forces, which is where we gain speed, because we can. I think we're at the point of diminishing returns, especially in the automotive industry, since you mentioned it earlier. Yeah, we're at the point of diminishing returns there. And the others are really overtaking us left and right, the Chinese as well as the Teslas of this world. And we just watch and keep tinkering, both with software and with bodywork and engine construction, still holding on to these old standards of perfectionism. And again, just so there's no misunderstanding, imperfectionism has nothing to do with sloppiness. It's important, or rather, it's not about carelessness, but about the conscious acceptance that something is in the process of becoming, and that this process, if we're honest, is never truly finished.
Exactly. Plato already said that. There's actually the theory of ideas about the perfect thing. And in our perceptible reality, there is always only an approximation of that, which can only ever take place in an individual thing.
And then, of course, I shouldn't forget to mention this. Another advantage besides speed is that I create space for creativity and for peak performance. If I also allow for a certain degree of chaos meaning processes that are not predictable or controllable, calculable, that's precisely this 20% gap of imperfectionism. Let's see what happens. It's also exciting after all. Of course, it also leaves room for creative solutions. And that's something, for example, that the Russians are very famous for, that they've often learned to deal with. imperfectionism, whether in space or on Earth. Or take the shock of DeepSeek, did you, that cheap AI from China. The Americans, after all, have restricted the delivery of chips to China. So the Chinese had to get creative. And as a result, I think they managed to reduce the cost of the AI to a tenth or something like that, which is out of necessity. I think that's a great example of how chaos and imperfectionism can actually foster creativity. And that's exactly what I believe we urgently need, both as an economy and within companies. So I believe there are many, many levers. If you approach this topic consciously, that's the difference. Not carelessly, but by making a deliberate choice. Today, I get to surprise Charlene with the topic of imperfectionism. There are two hurdles. First, my handwriting, and second, the content. I'm curious to see how you'll handle it.
We're all really curious too.
Yes, we totally are.
Gym-timidation? Okay. Is that English? Gym-timidation? So does that mean I intimidate people with my fitness activities or with how I behave at the gym?
It's the fear of the gym.
The fear, you're such a fool.
So not fear of, but fear in the gym. Yes. So what happens in the gym? Yeah. Like when you, see yourself as this scrawny office guy, and then across from you is the real stud, with a chest twice as broad, who then, lifts 20 kilos like it's nothing, all manly, and you're already struggling with 5. This embarrassment, this...
Really?
Yeah. And that is actually the main blocker now. Why people sign up for a membership with determination, but then end up not going.
That's funny. I don't have that fear at all. But I do have a different one when I go to a new gym. I never feel like having to go through the whole social thing again. Having the coach show me how to use every machine. I always feel ridiculous doing that because you end up looking like a complete idiot, like a rookie, when you walk around all unsure and the coach takes you by the hand. I really don't feel like it at all, which leads to the other result. I don't want to look stupid myself when I go over to the machines and think, how does this even work anyway? So I always just do the same 3 things. And I'm afraid of trying to find my way around there. And then you end up getting these looks from people.
You fear admitting weakness?
Yeah.
That's the problem here, right? She must be the strong, experienced one.
Yeah, so cool. And then I think to myself, now I'm doing some cool freeletics and some stretching exercises that look really fancy. And then I'd rather just go swimming.
Would you go to the gym if you had the equipment at home?
Yeah.
So back to social health again?
Yeah, because of the social aspect. But I noticed that a change of context, or rather a place that's dedicated to a specific purpose, makes me so much more productive. So when I go to the office to work, it depends on what kind of work I have to do, but especially when I'm procrastinating and need a little push, then I can work better at the office. Because somehow that's just the place for it.
Gym?
At the gym too.
Really?
Definitely.
So you wouldn't manage to motivate yourself at home to get started?
I would too, but it's easier for me at the gym. I actually have this really cool digital option for that. I have a gamified fitness game, like a game for the Nintendo Switch, and it's really cool. It really is. It's honestly really cool. I'll tell you about it sometime when we have more time, and you'd be amazed, but you probably still wouldn't do it. But it's really great.
I need to do something too. But I bought myself a bike. That's a lot of fun as well. Okay, that's it. On the topic of imperfectionism, unless you want to add something else.
No, I wanted to do a wrap-up just to go over the 3 main benefits, just in case anyone missed them a bit, because I think we really are kind of advocates for this topic. Imperfectionism, serendipity is also closely related. And that's something that really many, actually I hardly know any company that wouldn't benefit from it. We've actually already identified 3 advantages. The first, speed. You make progress faster. Launch and learn, not learn and launch. The second, the social aspect in your company culture. We also touched on that briefly, at least, how much more relaxed it is when you ease off the pressure a bit. And then the third aspect, of course, is that I create a greater platform for identification for my customers. And we've also seen...
Because of humanity and approachability, yes.
Yes, because this approachability and higher identification bring a lot of monetary advantages, loyalty, Customers who feel emotionally connected to their company are more loyal, more willing to pay, so they're more willing to spend, and so on and so forth. So this is really extremely well researched. If you want to know more, write to us. We'll send you the studies. I'm just telling you, it's worth it.
So that's a real move at the end, right? Through imperfection, increasing customers' willingness to pay by letting go of perfectionism. That's it. Done. Thanks for watching. And we're looking forward to next time.
Adieu. BrandTrust Live.
Now stop. This will take 5 minutes now. 12 o'clock. Come on, let's eat something. Let's move on.
Let's eat something now.